The whole page, keep that one on. Keep that one on, because I think we need to see it. So I can work like one here. We have time, don't worry.
Good afternoon, Your Honours. We'll begin this afternoon session with the testimony of Dr. Mongzani. This afternoon we will have two experts speaking, both providing testimony in relation to the Rohingya. Daniel.
Your Honours, please give me a few seconds, a few minutes. I want to get this document. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. I'm going to address the issue of Rohingya identity substantively, historically, officially, relying on primary historical and official Burmese language documentations. My primary sources include one of the earliest historical primary source published in the Royal Asiatic Society of Research out of Calcutta, written by Scottish medical doctor working for the British East India Company in 1790. His name was Dr. Francis Buchanan. He was by profession a medical doctor, but his passion was what we would call today ethno-linguistics. So he did field work as a member of the British East India Company at the time based in Calcutta. He traveled extensively in the country that was then known to the British as Burman Empire. Particularly, he focused on the distribution of ethnic groups and linguistic communities in the then Arakan state. He published his research paper in the proceedings of the Royal Asiatic Society in 1798. That's 9 years after the French Revolution. And 14 years after the Burmese conquest of the Arakan Buddhist nation or kingdom called Arakan or Rakhine Kingdom. So to date, Rakhine Buddhists do not celebrate Christian New Year, January 1st, because for them, that was the day their kingdom fell in 1785. And the year 1785 is pinned in the collective memories of all Rakhine people. And I came from a town called Mandalay. We have the most revered and famous Buddha image. To us, it is known as Mahamuni, the great image. And some of you who have been to Mandalay, this is a must stop for tourists. And for the Rakhines and others who are more historically minded, the image is known as Rakhine Buddha because that was the most important war loot that my own people brought back from Mra'u. Mra'u is tipped to become the next UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Rakhines wanted their fallen old capital to be declared World Heritage Site. This is important because it relates directly to 1982 Citizenship Act in the following way. Three of the framers of 1982 Citizenship Act that was drafted and completed in October 1982 were either my personal friends or my friend's parents. I will name them. One was Dr. Mau Mau, trained in the Inner Temple next to LSE in London, called to the bar, did his doctorate at Utrecht in law, and he held a visiting fellowship at Yale Law School for 2 years. And he was General Ne Win's legal advisor. And from late 1960s on, Dr. Mau Mau was Revolutionary Council member, a member of Ne Win's cabinet. He chaired the Citizenship Drafting Committee on the order of Ne Win at the time, the chairman of the Burma Socialist Program Party. At Ne Win's official residence in AD Road, Rangoon, the Citizenship Drafting Committee convened an inaugural session where General Ne Win gave an opening remark and directives to the Citizenship Drafting Committee. Two other members who were part of this drafting committee were Rakhine nationalist intellectuals. One was a personal friend of mine who studied history and did his doctorate at Monash University in Australia. The other one was his fellow Rakhine nationalist named U Santa Ao. He was Director General of Higher Education Department in the 1980s, just before I joined the university as a student. The two Rakhine nationalist members of this drafting committee wanted to use the year of the collapse of their Rakhine Kingdom, 1785. Dr. Mau Mau, who was my friend's father, and we were from Mandalay, both of us. He was 2 generations older than me. Dr. Mau Mau chaired the committee and offered a compromise because he was the legal mind behind 1982 citizenship law. And his compromise was that 1785 was too far. Why don't we use, 1824 as the cutting year for who could become, at birth, citizen of Burma. 1824. That's, you calculate however many years. That's almost 180 years, 180 plus years. So that was the bar that the post-independent state of Socialist Republic of Burma set for the citizenship eligibility. I know that sovereignty enables governments to decide who would be accepted as citizens and who would not be accepted. Even today, some of the most oldest liberal states, such as UK, they can, with the pen of an executive order, strike off people from their citizens list. So I think international law is on the states to decide. It's the state's prerogative to decide who is citizen and who is not. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not here to contest or argue otherwise. But what I wish to argue here is this. The 1982 citizenship law is one of the most important instruments of repression, disempowerment, disenfranchisement, and ultimately genocide behind the current events that the United Nations officials and leaders call ethnic cleansing. But I argue it is a genocide because to digress very briefly, the popular understanding, or I would say misunderstanding of genocide, is all about mediagenic blood and horrid stories of people fleeing. But in fact, if you read the original framer of the term genocide, the late Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, who survived the Holocaust himself, genocide has two parts, and most of the distinguished scholars of genocide know this for a fact. But for the public, the genocide has two parts, and both parts are anchored on the identity of the group. People are killed, they're driven out of home, their lives are destroyed, their lands confiscated, their women raped, not as individual humans. Therefore, crimes against humanity is utterly inadequate to address this issue. It does not capture the essence and the materiality of the crime. People are killed because they belong to this group, whatever the name. Whether the state recognizes their name or the state imposes another name on them is immaterial. What is material, what is consequential, is that these people who call themselves Rohingya, whom the Burmese racist state call and the public call as Bengalis, they are killed because of their identity. Simply because of their identity, they have been killed. They have been driven out, close to 1 million, or perhaps even more, over the last 39 years. Now onto the issue of the validity of Rohingyas' claim that they are who they are. They are who they claim they are, Rohingya, not Bangladeshi, not Bengali. We need to bear in mind two things. No identity is set in stone. Most of you who have studied nationalism would know the name Benedict O.G. Anderson. I audited a course with Ben at Cornell back in 1994 fall, and I knew the man who coined the most famous book title, Imagine Communities. Ben would say, Ben Anderson, identities, national or otherwise, are imagined. They are imagined, product of imagined collective memories and active preservation of those memories. And so I would not say that there are no Chittagonians that did not come to form what the Rohingyas call Rohingya community. Because as I said yesterday, these are borderland communities whose presence and existence and histories are binational, politically speaking. So the identities cannot be treated as blood-based. That would be fascist. The blood-based notion of identity ended in major catastrophe. Most people in this room and those watching know, Holocaust. Yeah? The Nazism, I would say what Rohingya face today are worse than what the Nazi victims, particularly of Jewish community, faced. The Jews were killed as Jews. They were de-Germanized. They were stripped of basic rights and citizenship. But the German state never denied that they were Jews. Today, we have a situation where the victims died, or were killed, driven out, not as Rohingyas, not as who they are, but as somebody else. It's like, to bring it to the street level, it's like, people calling me a dog, establishing me as a dog falsely, whereas if I am flesh and blood, and psychologically in my head, I know I am human being. So the Rohingyas die trying to prove that they are humans, while their killers pursue them as dogs. So this is all related to identity. And so now returning to the historical evidence. Like I said, in 1789, Francis Buchanan unequivocally, in a primary historical document he himself wrote and published, Rohingya, the word Rohingya, and they were identified as Mohammedans, followers of Prophet Muhammad, or Muslims as we would say today. So in 1798, primary historical evidence established unequivocally Rohingyas were natives of Arakan, and that they were Mohammedans. So bear that in mind. Rohingya identity, though an imagined product, was locked in the primary historical literature as a reified reality, real. And that identity was not entered into the colonial era censuses. That is one of the things that the Burmese, one of the very, very few things that the Burmese government latches onto, to say that because the Rohingyas were not mentioned in any historical documentations about the demography of the Arakan, they don't exist. Well, in the 19th century, the European understanding of identity is pseudoscientific and racist. The British collected censuses not to establish truths about people, not to collect facts, but to use whatever they can generate as facts on the ground in order to enable themselves to rule over the population, to control the population effectively. The key word here is population. Genocide is not about individuals. Genocide is about populations. Populations with racial, ethnic, national, and religious identities. And in this case, my testimony would unreservedly argue the attack on the Rohingya identity and the attack on the physical body of a population recognized as Rohingya by themselves, recognized by the UN as Rohingya, recognized by the world outside as Rohingya, but being referred to officially in Burma and in the popular discourses as Bengali. So this is a circular narrative here. And then this speaks to Lemkin's two-part genocide. One is destruction of the identity. The other is imposing the identity that the perpetrators, the genocidal killers, policymakers impose on the victims who are left standing after waves of death and destruction. But one small qualification or modification I need to make is that although Raphael Lemkin mentioned that the imposition, the second part, the other 50% of the genocidal act, it was done sequentially. In the Burmese case, we commit this Lemkinian genocidal destruction concurrently. While we are killing and driving them out, we are imposing our identity, you see, on the dead Rohingyas as well as those who are still alive. And in 1948, we regain our independence. The first, or the original Constitution and Citizenship Act that is a part of it, was to be understood in a larger context of the British India being dissolved. There were in the Indian Congress, there were in Parliament with the Nehru's and Gandhi's Indian Congress. There were discussions about who would become full-fledged citizens after new boundaries were redrawn as the direct result of the British decision to give up India, to give up the auxiliaries states of India. Burma was annexed to India in 1886, January 1st. Then in the 1930s, we were split from India, and London dealt with Burmese nationalists directly. So to make the long story short, the discussions that took place between the British and people like Gandhi and Nehru about the status of who would become citizens after the British left mirror the discussion that took place within the Burmese nationalist community. The direct result of these discussions and negotiations in the British-controlled Parliament after the World War II is the 1947 Constitution. The Constitution granted anyone who was physically present as residents of British Burma 12 years before Burma became independent in 1948. So this was retroactive recognition of all residents of Burma, irrespective of race, faith, religion, political affiliations. And fast forward, so in the 1950s, several years after independence of Burma, the Union of Burma government at the time, led by Prime Minister U Nu, initiated a pilot program to issue citizenship identity cards. Yeah? That was the very first time in the history, in the recorded history of Burma, including colonial era, from 1824 to 1947 or 48, that a political entity that controls the populations of the country issued a national identity card. And that identity card made no mention of race or faith, except that the identity card would mention father's name. It's like Scandinavian system. John's son become Johnson. You know, Johan's son become Johan's son, son of Johan, son of John. Because the Burmese society and culture does not have a naming system. Women do not take husbands' names after marriage. Children do not take father's name, for that matter, mother's name. So we do not have a systematized system of naming that would enable anyone to trace their lineage the way the Chinese civilization had. So the Chinese, you know, if you've got Chan, and there are Chans over 3,000 years, at some point they're all related, or they're all from the same village or same clan. We don't have that. And now to the cutting year of 1824 for 1982 Citizenship Act. Back in 1824, Burma was no different from Cambodia or Thailand. In that, we were known as essentially palm leaf societies. All the records, including royal orders coming out of the palace, were recorded on dried palm leaves with gold lettering. My fifth generation grandfather was the chief archivist at the palace before the fall of Mandalay. Yeah. I can speak with authority on the subject of our society's reliance on palm leaf. The printing press did not arrive in Burma until 1817. It was brought by the Christian missionaries because they wanted to spread the gospel in writing and on paper. So, Your Honors, we are talking about a society that never had identity cards, not even on palm leaf when it comes to national registration. Back in 1824. And yet, Rohingyas are legally required, with the popular backing, that they provide documentation to establish that their ancestors settled in Burma before the first British annexation of that narrow, fertile agricultural land, coastal land next to the Bay of Bengal, we call today Rakhine, Western Burma. Yeah? Most importantly, one of the framers of 1982 citizenship, Rakhine historian named Dr. Ajo, he was a friend of mine. We were both exiled in the United States. He gave an interview to the Burmese language version of Irrawaddy News Group that used to be based in Chiang Mai, that is now operating out of Rangoon. And Irrawaddy, incidentally, is today cheerleading, run by Exile Group before, and now still the same people. They are cheerleading in the popular effort to deny that Rohingyas are our people, or that they are victims of this ethnic cleansing or genocide. But Dr. Ajo, in his interview in Irrawaddy, before he passed away several years ago, articulated the rationale from the Rakhine's perspective behind 1982 citizenship law. They wanted to make sure that Rohingya presence identity was delegitimized and completely erased from the collective memory and from the body of laws. So 1982 citizenship law did not pop up from nowhere. It cannot be understood unless we put that in the context of the first large-scale assault on Rohingyas that began on 12th of February 1978. The great irony here is 12th February has been celebrated annually as the Union Day. That is the day that the treaty known as Panglong or Pinlong was signed between Aung San Suu Kyi's father and the leaders of frontier regions, ethnic regions, borderland regions. So on the day that was to celebrate the diversity, the equality of ethnic people before law, the Burmese military launched the centrally organized, not from Rakhines. This is no mere product of communal violence or conflict. General Ne Win and his top deputies organized the assault, the very first assault on the Rohingya community. They made one mistake. That mistake was, before they destroyed the Rohingyas symbolically, they attempted to destroy the Rohingya in the physical sense. Soldiers, immigration officers, religious affairs officials, customs officials, special branch, military intelligence in the field, regular infantry troops. It started out with only 200-man operation. That was later and fast joined by the local Rakhine population that had an axe to grind against the Rohingya. But the lead was the state, the military-controlled state, the government of the Socialist Republic of Burma at the time. On February 12, 1978, attempted to destroy the Rohingya group in part or in whole, physically, in the physical sense of destruction. So, close to 280,000 Rohingyas in 3 months, from February to March, a few weeks, there was a force in the operation, and then the military resumed the attack after the water festival, after the Burmese celebrated their New Year. The troops resumed the attacks on the Rohingya, lasted until the end of June. Almost 280,000. If you look at the journalistic writings, the figures given were about 220. I have a book written by one of the key commanders that led that operation in 1978. He rose to serve as the chief of military intelligence for 25 years. His name's General Kenyon. I used to work with him when I was trying to facilitate Burmese military's negotiations with several countries, key countries in Europe and North America. This man, relying on military intelligence archives, gave the number close to 280,000. So, honorable panel of judges, what we just saw over the last 3 weeks is just a part of this long pattern of waves after waves of not 10,000, not 100,000. On average, every 10 years, my country, the military, named Tamadog, has been driving Rohingyas out, destroying them, destroying their communities physically, Like I said, because in 1978, they did not tell the world, all the Burmese public, that Rohingyas were not our people and they were interlopers, illegal migrants, or descendants of the British colonial era agricultural seasonal workers who decided not to go home because Burma was land of milk and honey. That was the story that they now tell the world. That is the story that Aung San Suu Kyi repeats to the world. So because...
Only one minute.
Yeah.
You are dealing with a very crucial point
Yeah.
for the tribunal. So probably we will have...
Questions.
I have, and we will have a lot of questions. And we have other very important expert witness for this session.
Yeah.
So I would ask you if you can summarize and finish in 2-3 minutes to give us the possibility to a lot of questions we have regarding these fundamental issues.
When the Burmese government successively, over the last 25 years, said Rohingyas do not exist, we don't have a group called Rohingya. Every single head of state, every single home minister, every single ambassador that is asked this question, are Rohingyas your citizens? They will tell you categorically that they are we do not have Rohingya as a group. And I would say emphatically, from Aung San Suu Kyi down to the street level people who say Rohingya do not exist, they are either outrightly, categorically lying in the face of mountain historical official documents. And finally, were they illegals? Were they someone else other than Bangladesh? The discourse inside the country, popular and official, was that in the democracy period, parliamentary democracy period from 1948 to 1962, the Rohingyas were given some provisional recognition as Rohingyas, and they were allowed to vote because the Prime Minister Ulu wanted the Rohingyas vote. Well, mathematically, this is utterly inconceivable. In a democratic polity, in an electoral system, politicians always play to the majority. Rohingyas are outnumbered in Arakan state 3-1 by Buddhist Rakhine. If Ulu wanted votes, he would appease the Buddhist majority, as Aung San Suu Kyi has over the last 5 years to get where she is today, to get a majority vote. So, but finally, the strongest, irrefutable argument or evidence that Rohingyas were officially recognized as both citizens, political citizens of Burma, and a constituent, ethnic, let me repeat, ethnic group of the Union of Burma. That came from the Ministry of Defense publication named Current Affair, from Ne Win's number 2 man named Brigadier General Aung Ji. He recognized the borderland nature of identities. He accepted Rohingyas as having bicultural roots. He called them our own people. This was published on 4th of July, 1961. And my own great uncle, finally, was made in charge of the Rohingya district, predominantly Rohingya district named Mayu district. And Aung San Suu Kyi's vice chair, former defense minister and commander-in-chief under General Ne Win in 1974, named retired General Tin U. He is now in his early 90s. He has also repeatedly denied that Rohingyas were our people, whereas in fact, he was the one who set up the Mayu district. So I think, Your Honors, the case to support the Rohingya claims that they are both fully fledged citizens, an ethnic group of Burma, is irrefutable. And I think if we take into consideration Lemkin's original conception of what genocide is, the attack on the group because of who they are, we have a case, we have a full genocide that is slow burning with massive waves of spikes of direct killings. That is what we are witnessing, nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sami, for a very detailed presentation, very useful. So I have some questions, and I would appreciate if you have some concise answers to follow the situation, because at least in my opinion, and regarding the discussion of how long is the Rohingya presence in Myanmar, in my opinion, it doesn't matter if they were there in the 18th century, but anyone has the right to citizenship beyond this racist thinking that how long are you in the soil, which is difficult to prove. So you presented the 1947 Constitution and this decision to give citizenships to anyone who was in the territory 12 years before independence. That's correct?
That's correct, sir.
So, did the government give documents, ID cards? Because you mentioned that for the first time in the history of Myanmar there were identity cards. So did the government give documents to any kind of citizens that were recognized as citizens because they were there 12 years before independence? So
yes.
Some Rohingya population had identity cards as part of this population due to the Constitution of 1947.
The first time the identity cards were issued was on a pilot basis. And the Rohingyas, like other communities, were also issued identity cards. What I stated emphatically earlier was there was no mention of race or faith, only the name, father's name, the address. And so the many Rohingyas from that generation could provide that documentation, and and so yes, my answer is yes. Rohingyas did have documentation as citizens, national identification card.
That's the question. Of course, yeah. Not all of them as in any other country, because probably in rural areas there were some people in different ethnic groups without documents. But my question was answered. So some Rohingya received documents due to this decision of the Constitution of 1947. So then, what is unclear to me is between 1947 and 1982, there were any other administrative decision on identity or ID cards, or the first transformation was this 1982 Act on identity. So what happened between 1947, 1948, 1982?
Can you help? I want to get to this page. No, down. What happened between 1947, or like January 4th, 1948, the day of independence, until the 12th of, until 1982, was that Rohingyas were allowed to hold parliamentary elected office. Rohingyas were allowed to hold positions in the state bureaucracies, as well as Rohingyas were allowed to serve in the security forces. If, Your Honors, as you know, being allowed to serve in a country's security forces is the ultimate form of acceptance, yeah, in any country in the world. So, and they were allowed to vote. As a matter of fact, Rohingyas were allowed to vote even after 1982 Citizenship Act was enacted. But post-1982, the Burmese government or the military's approach to Rohingya, particularly once they start playing electoral politics as the direct result of 88 uprisings, 1980 uprising, was more akin to the American South, where black people were constitutionally considered three-fifths human beings, but the plantation owners needed to compete for electoral representation. They counted the slaves as if they were humans, because until actually 2010, Rohingyas were allowed to vote. That's how many years after 1982. But they were issued white cards. Yeah, they were issued because they wanted the votes from the Rohingya, the military party, military-backed party, then known as Union Solidarity and Development Party, used the Rohingya bodies the way plantation owners in the 18th century United States used the slaves. You see what I'm saying? So that is why it is confusing. How come you are allowed to vote after 1982 citizenship law if you say you are discriminated and disenfranchised? No. The vote was only conditional. They were treated as bodies that will go to the polling stations and cast a vote for the military, who promised a kinder and better future for the Rohingya.
Okay, that's clear now. So let me confirm, between 1948 to 1982, there was no change, and some Rohingya could enjoy the civil rights as any other citizen of Burma. So one comment for the prosecution, I'm not sure if the Constitution of 1947 and I guess the Citizen Act, it is in the documents, but I'm not sure. Both documents should be part of the presentation, either the Constitution and the Act of 1982. And then another question is, Professor Sani, I guess it's my last one, because I know there may be more questions, is any other group was excluded or limited in citizenships in the Act of 1982 beyond the Rohingya? So all the other groups continue all in the citizenship, so there were any other discrimination?
There were discriminations against Chinese. There were discrimination against other, particularly people of Indian origin. But what we are talking about here is a wholesale targeting, singling out the Rohingya for this extraordinarily discriminatory treatment by the state. Because in the civil war areas of Kachin state of northern Burma, or Shan state of eastern Burma, or southeastern part of Burma called Karen state, because there was civil war, or there has been civil war since independence, as I speak today. The issuance of identity cards was not practical. Even voting was not practical. There are massive constituency in these civil war-torn zones. Back in 2010, just like 5 or 7 years ago, they were unable to vote. So there are populations that have not enjoyed equality or full citizenship as a result of civil war. But there is no policy, to the best of my knowledge, that the Burmese state has adopted and institutionalized over the last 40 years as the Burmese policy towards Rohingya. So there is a qualitative difference between the Burmese military and government treatment or mistreatment of the Rohingya and the other forms of abuses other non-Rohingya ethnic groups have been subjected to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Samni. Now, Judge Rossi.
A report of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, 2011, notes that the continuous persecution of the Rohingya in the period between 2008-2012 has a particular religious aspect, remembering the destruction of many mosques and the building of pagoda in areas with no Buddhist population. I would like to know what is the significance, the importance of the religious issue. Is a consequence or a cause?
The persecution of Rohingya at the genocidal proportion, to the genocidal proportions, and the general legalized and practiced discrimination against Muslims in particular and non-Buddhists, particularly Christians. That's what you're referring to. They are on a single continuum in terms of ideology. And they are what we are seeing here in the last 7 years since Burma opened up is the state's systematic mobilization, justification, and legalization of discrimination against the Muslim population in general. That's in addition to, but that is related to the discrimination of Rohingyas. As you know, today we have 4 national race and faith protection law in the country. On the issue of marriage, on the cultural side, Burmese women marrying Muslim men has been a thorn on the side of the Burmese historically over the last 100 years, since Rangoon was 60% people of Indian origin, Hindu, Muslims, Persian, and others. And so I think the Christians also suffer this form of discrimination. Backed by the military intelligence, certain Buddhist monks, whether Karens or Burma Buddhists, or mainstream Buddhists, they would forcibly go into Christian churches, build small Buddhist temples on Christian soils. Yeah? The Christians have kept their heads down because they know if they react with anger, what type of reaction they will get from the increasingly anti-foreign, Christian and anti-Muslim population and the government will react to. And so I think, yes, there have been these incidents that you would call religiously motivated. Yeah? But here, I wish to bring the discussion back to to my point here. The destruction of the Rohingya is a frontal assault on the group, symbolically and physically. And because in 1978, when the military launched the attack on the Rohingya for the physical destruction and removal of the Rohingya, they made a mistake of not establishing the legality, the public rationale to destroy this community. That is why they were forced to accept, out of 278,000 Rohingyas that fled in 1978. The Burmese military state had to back down and accept 220,000 Rohingyas when the state of Bangladesh unveiled the threat that Rohingyas were from Burma at the time, not Myanmar. This was 1978. If General Ne Win did not take them back, Bangladesh had no other choice to arm the Rohingya population. So confronted with this, sovereign state threat and having no legal basis established yet, Ne Win had to back down. 4 years later, we got 1982 citizenship law. And that is the year from which they would go out to the United Nations, to Geneva and other places and say, we do not have a group named Rohingya. That is they got the sequence wrong in terms of Lemkin's argument.
I'd like to go back again to the point that our chair raised on the post-1948 period, the ID cards. You mentioned about the pilot project. I'd like to know a little more about how extensive this was, and I understand that there was a decision to abandon it. Could you explain that a little bit? And do we have any figures on how many ID cards were actually issued in that period, and in which parts of Burma? And in fact, in particular, of course, in Rakhine State, where if there was not an indication, a marker on the ID card as to religion, are there any statistics do we know from the form of name or the townships that they were issued that we can extrapolate the numbers of Rohingyas who may have received ID cards at that time?
I mean, to answer your question, we need to divide the country, the Union of Burma at the time in 1953, 54, into 3 different parts using the military's terminology. There are 3 areas of Burma that are known as white zone, white area, not as in skin white, white as in peaceful, meaning the government is in full control of the population in a confined geographic location or locations. That's a white area. So I don't have exact statistics as to how many citizenship cards have been issued, how many communities have been given this privilege. The second zone is called brown zone, brown area. Brown meaning there were some ethnic freedom fighting forces, and there were also, no one has a complete control over the area. They're both parties in conflict. The central military and the central government and peripheral freedom fighting forces operate there. So that's brown zone. And the third one is black area, black zone. That is under complete control of armed ethnic organizations. In today's term, EAO, armed ethnic armed organization. So in these 3 zones, I would say that the Burmese government, central government, issued or pursued these pilot issuance of citizenship cards in the white zone only. So if we want to extract the statistical data, we have to look at in 1953 to 1978, which regions were under the Burmese government's or military's administrative and political control. And in terms of whether only when an individual turns 12, you are eligible to apply for citizenship. So in other words, after a child was issued birth certificate. For the next 12 years of his life or her life, there is no documentation that would entitle her to anything or that would protect her against either state or other forms of terror. And progressively, when the pilot project was initially rolled out, there was no complaints ever recorded either in the popular media or in the official registry or government reports that Rohingya faced difficulties in obtaining them. In other words, they were treated just like any other ethnic group in the 1950s. And in those days, they also had parliamentary representation in the parliament and also state protection. But progressively, if you are Rohingya, 12 years old boy or a teenage, a girl, or if you are Muslim, the complaints began in the 1960s and 70s and 80s that if you are Rohingya or Muslim, it takes a lot harder to receive this identification card. Because not like at USA or other places where you could get anything with a driver's license. The identification card entitles you to medical services, food rations. We were subject to a system of food rations from 1962 to 1988 until the socialist state declared itself null and void. For 26 years, this identification card was the lifeblood of every human. You need that for rice, you need that for cooking oil, you need that for soap, you need that to go to hospital, attend schools. And so denial of this, making this citizenship card progressively difficult and systematically difficult by the state, it just goes right to the heart of the destruction of that community.
Thank you very much. You clarified a lot this thing. I have another request, if possible, for the prosecution and even the Rohingya community. You can provide us some old identity cards that were provided to Rohingya people.
I have them. Others as well.
That was it.
Before you mentioned the Nazi power, I remember that in the trial versus Eichmann in Israel, in the trial,
Can you repeat it, please?
in the trial versus Eichmann in Israel, the defendant was acquitted until 1941 of the charge of genocide. Until he was condemned for the subsequent period, because the court said that until that day, the Nazi power had pursued only the ethnic cleansing of Germany, not genocide. Do you think that in the terrible vicissitude of the Rohingya, it's possible to put a border, to put a line between the attempt of ethnic cleansing and the project of genocide, and when?
What is the last part, Your Honor? I missed the last sentence.
I would like to know if, according to you, in the story of Rohingya, it's possible to draw a line, put a line between the attempt of the ethnic cleansing and the project of genocide in terms of year, of period.
Yeah. My answer is no. It has been from the get-go, from the very inception, when the Burmese state decided that the Rohingya needs to be destroyed by any means necessary. From that moment on, this was a genocide. And why did the Burmese state single out Rohingya? That is a question we need to ask. Whereas in fact, the phenomenon of borderland people belonging to different nation states post-World War II is universal across the world, including Europe. The Burmese state decided that Rohingyas were a threat to national security from the defense perspective as early as 1960s, after the military came to power in 1962. In 1960, there is a break, there is a complete rupture in the historical development of the country in 1962. In 1962, Burmese state, or the Burmese people, did not experience just military coup. We were thrown into essentially a total revolution that was imposed, envisaged, and executed by the Burmese military. So we hear about cultural revolution, that's the most infamous one, but what the world did not know was 1962 imposition of military rule is a total revolution on a nationwide scale in the zones that they call white area, white zone. And along the other borders, Burmese border with China, India, Laos, and Thailand, there are other populations. Yeah? But the difference between those populations who also have a similar phenomenon of intermingling and even cross-border migrations, both ways, only the Rohingya has been singled out. The only factor that distinguishes the Rohingya from those populations is their religion. Because Bangladesh is one of the most populous nations of Muslim people, the Burmese military did not want a Muslim population with a single geographic location over which they have historical and official claim. So that is why they decided from 1960s on, killings is only one part. There were, transmigration, state-sponsored transmigration of northern Rakhine. The Burmese were bringing in boatloads of Buddhists, including criminal convicts, with the promise of early release if they would relocate and populate northern Rakhine. So that is why this is so institutionalized, but on the basis of geopolitical consideration, on the basis of the group's identity as Muslim people.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sami. It was very clear and very useful for the Tribunal, your testimony. So now you can move for the next expert witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would now like to call to testify the expert witness, Professor Chaudhary Abra. Thank you.
Honorable judges, it's a privilege to be here and to be a part in this process to bring accountability. We live in the 21st century. The whole corpus of international human rights law had developed, after the Nazi Germany experience of the genocide. We had a plethora of rules, regulations, conventions, principles, declarations. Many of these countries have adhered to and committed to uphold those principles. But we are faced at a situation where one country is flagrantly violating most of these, conventions and most of these laws. And here we are, the states are not doing anything. United Nations credibility is now at stake. ASEAN is sitting tight without realizing that eventually This will not be a Bangladesh problem. As soon as the refugees, make initials, what you call settle down in inverted commas, they will try to have secondary movements, with, massive consequences for this region. So the importance of this tribunal is phenomenal. For those of us who would like to have respect for rule of law, respect for human rights, and want the credible international institutions to stand up for the oppressed, to stand up for people who are facing bayonets, bullets, helicopter gunships. We feel that if not anything else, at least there are these group of conscientious people standing up for them. And in that respect, I consider myself to be privileged. We talk about genocide. There are many dimensions to genocide. The killings were there. But also we know, along with killings, arson, rape, mayhem, and brutalization, those are the obvious aspects of genocide, serious bodily harm. But there are also very important dimensions, bodily harm as well as mental harm to the members of the community, members of the group. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Those are important, things that need to be brought in. The point that I'm trying to make here, when the Burmese refugees cross the Naf River, those who are able to, maybe they feel they have come to safety. There may be a degree of satisfaction that at least everything is left behind. From now, situation may not be the best, but at least we are there. Unfortunately, what I will argue that, over the years during their, what we basically I will argue is that, they enter a new phase of uncertainty, and that takes toll. And the points that I made earlier in terms of, weakening, systematic weakening, that continues even after they cross the border. Let me sort of step back a bit to give you the Bangladesh as a host nation. We'd soon be hosting 1 million, if not, they have already come so. It'll be, I think Amnesty come up with a report which said there are more refugees fled to Bangladesh in 3 weeks than fled by sea to Europe in 1 year. Let's put that into perspective. And where are they coming to? They're coming to a country which there is an absence of a legal framework to take care of the refugees. We are not talking about only the resources, that it is a poor country, relatively. It is also, population density is very high. The region where the refugees are there, it's very much an economically depressed area. Those realities are there. But no less important is the fact, when you talk about protection, there is no legal framework to deal with the refugees. We don't have a law, national law. The country, there is no what you call a regional framework like Cartagena Declaration or OAU Convention. We have not ratified the 1951 Refugee Convention nor the 67 Protocol. This is despite the fact the country created one of the largest refugee flows of 20th century. About 10 million people went to India. The country experienced, and also when the military rulers ruled the country, their myopic policies led to Hills people moving on to India. 55,000 were there. We also experienced in 1978, as was told, 1991, 92, and subsequently. We who try to advocate for the rights of refugees, with successive governments, we said, this is something we must do. We need to have a legal framework. Ministers come and go, attend, grace our programs, promise that they would act upon it. but it never figures in the, but here we are now, one of the largest crises, Bangladesh is facing. So we don't have any protection system in place in this country. As a result, what happens is, refugee treatment is based on ad hocism and arbitrariness. And added to that, in recent time, has been issue of increased securitization. What I would say, it was an issue of benign neglect. Now that has become increased, securitization through various kinds of speech act. The language of discourse have shifted over time. Refugees, in the common parlance, in the parliament sessions, in the mainstream media, barring few honorable exceptions, are considered to be infiltrators from the East, intruders. Mind you, this is in a context when Indian state views Bangladeshis, irregular entries as infiltrators from the East. So here we got our own intruders from the East. And the whole idea that they are asylum seekers, they are refugees, that get lost. We also see that in a massive way, the mainstream media and others are manipulated by intelligence agencies. And as a result, this securitization sort of gains traction. And we try to argue that although we are not signatory or we are not party to 1951 Refugee Convention, under customary international law, extending protection to this refugee is not an act of charity. It's our responsibility. And that's one of the op-eds that some of us, we put in the papers. But it is difficult, in this context of securitization to get those arguments, to push that agenda. Refugees, this is the context. Refugees are blamed for deterioration of law and order, degradation of environment, destruction of social and moral fabric, being engaged in criminal activities, trading in yaba, human rights, human trafficking, gun running, militancy. And my counter argument is, if we had bothered to have set up structures to take care of the Rohingyas who had come, except for those who are kept in the camps, 31,000. Initially, there were 21,000 in UNHCR's jargon. It was parlance, it was residual caseload. That over the years, that has come to about 31,000. So apart from this group of people, there are 300 to 400 Rohingyas who came to 100,000 Rohingyas who came to Bangladesh without any protection mechanism whatsoever. So if you do not take care, if you do not have places in things in structures in place, obviously they would try to fend for themselves in some ways, and if in order to have their shelter, if they cut trees, you cannot blame them, So this is, I'm not going to labor on this because I'm coming to the main point. And also these claims about engaging in criminal activity, there has not been any proper evidence-based, position to share that, to back that up. Pardon me. So there is also this case of, for the absence of protection, what we see is they are not, they have to fend for themselves, as I said, and is an important source for cheap labor, for the construction sector, for the deep sea fishing sector, and agricultural labor, and all that. So it's not that Bangladeshis are not, benefiting from the presence of these, refugees. We interviewed refugees during our research in various times. What we see is wage discrimination, non-payment, irregular payment of wages. And in some instances, those who go for deep sea fishing, go for maybe 15, 20 days, they're promised money. When they come back, they are not given a single penny, but they have no recourse because officially, they can't go anywhere. They cannot lodge complaint. I'll present one case, and that has been highlighted in different newspapers also, where a teenage girl was gang raped. what the government says are undocumented, Myanmar nationals. Father went to the police station to lodge a complaint. Police officer was very nice, but he said, look, we have a problem here, that I'll accept your complaint, but I will also charge you for illegal entry into the country. That would mean 5-year imprisonment. That's one case. On the second case, we had this case of released prisoners. Prisoners like the one that I said, who were apprehended, taken to custody, and served out their sentence. If the judge was liberal, 2 years. If he went by the book, 5 years. But these individuals were languishing in jail for as many as 12 years. When we got to know about it, we wanted more information. We filed I became the principally our research unit. We filed a writ petition, public interest litigation, to the court. Court took that into cognizance, asked for the responsible ministries and police authorities to respond. And of course, their response was flimsy, and court, accepted. And we successfully moved the court, to secure, and advised to release those prisoners who have served out the sentence. We just had to provide an evidence from UNHCR that if they were released, if the government agreed, then they will be taken to the existing camps. So this is, I'm just only saying, and one more instance. I know time is short. Some years ago, a Buddhist temple in Cox's Bazar was desecrated. Before any investigation, was instituted, our home minister flew into this place and blamed the Rohingyas for it. And subsequent investigations, not official ones, that we never get to see the reports. Many are instituted, we need to get the reports by, more or less responsible and credible agencies. Saw major political parties were essentially there. Maybe few Rohingyas or others were, they just joined them. But it was not anything to do with, that Rohingyas sponsored it. So these are, this issue. In terms of the ad hocism and arbitrariness, what we see is pushback in violation of principle of non-refoulement. And that had taken place at different times. We argued in different forums. Our argument is essentially writing op-eds, holding seminars, and trying to negotiate with those in the authority, and trying to say that, look, this is something we just simply cannot do. They of course, but the reality is, in some instances, I would not say that has been many, in some instances, including during this, crisis, refoulement, non-refoulement principle was not respected. The point that I'm trying to submit here is that refugees over the years, since 1991-92, there has been no effort for status determination. These people came. No one bothered to know why these people are coming, under what conditions. The convenient thing is they were deemed to be economic migrants. They were deemed to be economic migrants. And for the last 2 days, what we have been hearing, when you cannot move from one place to another, and I'm not going to repeat them. You know the context for which these people were moving. Burmese state, became very smart. Like in 1972 and 1991-92, it was not sending, refugees with bullet and bayonet wounds, or like this, when, that became that gains media attention. They engaged in low-intensity conflict in northern Arakan, made sure they will make hell so that these people, cannot forced relocation, forced labor, and a whole range of things that they have instituted. And as a result, these people had to leave the land. And here we are receiving these people, not caring to know that, why they are coming. I myself went to, after doing some field investigation, went and met senior members of the government, not this time, some years back. And his response was very candid. He said, look, we are trying to engage Burma on this issue. We are negotiating with this residual caseload of 21,000 or 26,000 at the time. If we bring this particular factor in, then that will be added problem. So let us organize, and Burmese state really played us up in the sense that always they gave the impression that this will certainly be addressed. And in the meantime, they continued to, send refugees back. So, and there was this fixation on the part of the policymakers of repatriating the existing caseload. And refugee repatriation issue, Bangladesh perhaps genuinely believed in the Burmese, and was what deems to be, someone said, patient and mature. But I think that has been a flawed policy, and we should be held responsible for failing to raise the red flag. Because if we accuse of international community why they have not done enough, at the same time, I guess, we should be asked, what have you been doing over the years? Why haven't you been saying that why these people are coming, So in a way, I think there was this is again emanates from the issue of advocacy and arbitrariness. And there was also this whole idea of relocating the refugees to an island which half-day that comes underwater. And that was coming at a time last year or year before when the Burmese state for the first time was receiving some international attention, for mistreating or for genocide in Rohingya. Parallelly, we had this flawed policy of announcing that we are going to relocate the Rohingyas to an inhabitable island. We also, in deference to the Burmese government, Bangladesh government for a long time has not used the term Rohingya. Can you believe it? I mean, they are not recognizing this group. So our government, in deference to them, was not also using the term. I think that this will change after the latest round of violence. I don't know what the Prime Minister is going to say tomorrow or when he addresses. During earlier flows, agencies, like a year ago or a year and a half ago, international specialized agencies, I'm not going to name them because that may put them into trouble, but everyone knows about it, they were asked not to provide assistance to the incoming Rohingyas. Just humanitarian, water, sanitations, hygiene, hygienic things. These were not given. Again, I don't want to prolong it. Issue for the first time, to be fair to the government, it came up with a national strategy paper in 2013. No consultation was organized. It was very hide and seek. Finally we got copies of that paper, and it's full of contradiction. I'm not going into the details of that. It says on the one hand that Bangladesh and government agencies, diplomats overseas should do utmost to impress international community that Rohingyas are fleeing persecution at home and they should help us. But what are they doing at home? What is the response? In the policies here, complete securitization, shoring up the border, intelligence agencies, and whole range of how we do these things. That has been the focus. So there is a complete disjuncture, on what is essentially this problem. How do we address it? That has not been done. As a follow-up to the national strategy paper, what they had done was conducted a survey. The Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics was involved. It was UNHCR, to the best of my knowledge, was not made an effective party. Maybe there was a degree of involvement. One of the international organizations, not guided by the normative framework of the United Nations, was put in charge, to do some of the work. Rohingyas were not informed about what it entailed, so they were registered, and in some instances, the whole exercise, enumerators would go, talk to people, and put Rohingya household, non-Rohingya household, mixed household, actually mark the household. And you can think, where these things, I'm not going to go into the details of that. So even as I said, it did not even, and they issued a card, the card did not, we tried to ask, what does this card entail? And many Rohingyas volunteered the information, hoping that this will give them a degree of protection. So we don't want, refugee status, because that has to be done properly. But degree of protection, you must ensure that. Finally, to the best of my knowledge until this day, it does not ensure any such protection. The latest example, and that I saw in the newspaper last night, I cannot be 100% sure, in an op-ed, an important one who's involved in disaster management, he wrote, the bank account that has been opened by the government to secure people's donation, it said, for account name is humanitarian assistance to illegal Myanmar migrants. If this is the case, if this is the case, and in all likelihood, because this is one of the, again, most respected national daily carried this story. If this is the case, then this is the ultimate proof of arbitrariness, ad hocism, and not being able to recognize what is the ground reality with regard to the Rohingyas. With regard to the current inflow, the route is pirate infested. The pirates pounce on whatever belongings refugees can manage with them. I'm coming to the point of this issue. The boatmen in cahoots with pirates, they are robbing them. Media report alleges, I would underline, bold, and italicize that, alleges cut goes to border guards of both countries. We don't know to what extent it's true. There has been an increase of 6,000% in the river crossing toll. What has been the regular charge, that has gone by 6,000%. Refugees are given 16 times less in money conversion than the market rate. So what was the market rate on 24th of August in that area? Refugees are given 16 times less. Those who bring along themselves with a bit of gold, many families have them. It is easy to hide. They are being sold, again, as per that newspaper report, 1/8 of market base. 1/8 of market base. And fixers are charging from US $112 to $6,200 to smuggle refugees to other parts of the country. And very soon, these smugglers will be charging some bit more, to take them to other countries. And there is no doubt that is going to happen. So what we basically see is condition where people moved in for safety. There is no legal framework. There is no institutional framework. There is the degree of sympathy of local people, which, sort of, there is a flow, there is not a regular flow of that. The media is hostile to them. The local administration, individuals, of course, I should mention, there are individual officers who are very good. And a border guard, one of our consultation, BGP commander said, in the last time round, not this year, he said that, look, here I was, pushing them back with petrol, for the motorboat, petrol, dried rice, water, and other things. And I was instructed to do that, to save their life. And I was torn into this. What am I doing? How would they survive? But I was under compulsion to push them back. And this is a reasonably decent, high-placed commander, in public statement, he made that. And as a result, what we see is, the survivors who come, they experience gruesome murders of family members and rape. We have all heard that, no need to repeat. Children are exposed to barbarity of epic proportion. And this is someone where the head of our guest who was here from the National Human Rights Commission, he and I was in a television panel just the night before I came, along with the person who went to the field. And she said that I saw women walking around like zombies in the evening, in late evening, without knowing where they were going. They just could not think anymore. And Razia had a lot of stories to say. So obviously there is, case of mental trauma, and harm that has been done for children, women, and elderly persons, everyone for that matter. And this is backed in a condition where fear is being apprehended, fear of apprehension by police at any time. Not only the one who came before, fear of being subjected to extortion by local gangs, fear of rape, and knowing fully well that, complete impunity, because these people will not go complain, as I stated in my earlier case. If the erratic government policies and absence of any documentation increases the fear of being apprehended as militants. Again, the securitization, it's not only that you have come as an illegal entrant, that's 5 years. But if you're charged, if you cannot, you may be charged for being an extremist and all that. And back home, this is really, like in many other countries, this is the thing, With regard to systematic weakening, with hunger and malnutrition is order of the day. If we leave out the 32,000 who are in the camps, maybe WFP and others are providing minimum, meeting their minimum nutritional needs, hygienic facilities, and all that. But rest, even the best of my knowledge, even the international agencies did not ever bother to look into conditions of these people in a proper representative sort of way. They are bereft of identity. They are bereft of future. And I have my doubts whether we serve any purpose by identifying these people as stateless persons. Because it, in a way, dilutes their claims to citizenship of Burma and gives the signal to the Burmese government, okay, they're stateless persons, not our responsibility anymore. I'm no lawyer. I don't have any, E in jurisprudence. But as layperson, I feel this again contributes to their weakening of their sense of identity. That, okay, aren't we Burmese? Government is not saying, government is saying that we are not Burmese. Okay, I'll put up with that. Now, international community is saying we are stateless people. I guess we need to look into that, to what extent that is proper or not. Maybe legally or juridically that's the right approach, but I think that there is a toll that, the people are paying. As I said, for the overwhelming bulk of this group, there is no access to education, although Bangladesh is a signatory, is a party to conventions on rights of the child. There is little access to healthcare. Children are subjected to early marriage. Vulnerability to trafficking and human smuggling. And here, there are a lot of, and this has been quite a bit studied. Many agencies have done the studies. I will submit in this here, many years ago, when I went to the camp, a boy of this height came to me and put in a paper in my hand. And I went out, when I went out of there, I realized that, okay, he put something, what is it? He said, please tell the RRC, or whatever, the camp in charge, or CIC, that allow us to play football here. Well, they don't have, they are not born into childhood. They're born as adults. That's the point that I'm trying to make. No right to, legally, no right to earn the livelihood, as I said, living without dignity. Just in the newspaper the other day, what appeared to be a person of whatever, she said, she begged, keep me as your servant, but don't send me to Burma. Having said all those, there is also stark evidence of age. I don't want to portray these people as victims. They are survivors. Many have agency as well. Many have gained agency to fight all the odds. Some are moved out. None of them are camps. They have started petty trading, moved on to slightly bigger trading. Some in the labor, in the deep sea fishing industry, they are an important labor force. Some are engaged in international migration. They managed to sort of secure Bangladeshi passport and go to other countries. And that has been another point of security, that they are earning us bad name. The Rohingyas are doing misdeeds in Gulf states and others So therefore, not only they are taking away our jobs, but they are also giving our bad name, without, again, having evidence. And my counter argument is, in fact, many countries are, like Malaysia, like Saudi Arabia, have soft corner for the Rohingyas. And as a result, have things in place, in terms of job and others. And it is we, the Bangladeshis, some section, present ourselves to those authorities, claiming us to be Rohingyas. That is, again, this is anecdotal, but that fact is also there. And when we challenge the dominant narrative, obviously it's very uncomfortable to others. But at least it gives the Rohingya that, that at least the truth, at least partial truth is being spoken. And so as a result, even though what I'm saying is they have agency, but these are very tenuous, because it can always change, if government wants to clamp down. My final points, this is a testing time, as I said, for the UN to be seen relevant. It failed in different parts of the world, and you are most competent to know what are those places. Its credibility is at stake. When liberal states are busy feeding and hosting the Burmese general, reported, US, even Germany, Italy, Austria, India, Japan came out just yesterday. We saw it in some Huffington Post column. And crime against humanity, I guess Bangladesh is in the front line of defending, I would claim, civilization, because everyone is backing out. It's genocide that Rohingyas are being subjected to, not only by helicopter gunships, bullets, bayonets, but also through prolonged mental hurt, physical and mental harm, and deliberately inflicting on the group, on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. As I said in my earlier statement, I repeat, world cannot afford that the corpus of international human rights law has been developed so painstakingly over the years since Nazi Germany's genocide. The nursery rhyme books of Rohingya children are there in the charred villages of Mangdu, into ashes. We don't want these documents, to be treated as such. And we have the moral responsibility, to stand up for it and make the perpetrators accountable so that these refugees can go back to their countries in dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Abrar, for a very insightful and useful presentation for the Tribunal. I have a question, but it is also a request. So as I told yesterday, one of the objectives of the People's Tribunal is that the judgment could produce some recommendations. So it is clear the recommendations to the government of Myanmar and to the international community to sanction the government and to stop the situation. But I think due to your special field of expertise and the great presentation you did, my question is if you have some recommendations regarding how to deal with the refugee question in Bangladesh now. What recommendations can you then either to the government of Bangladesh or to other regional or international bodies or other countries to intervene in the situation beyond trying to stop the actions by the state of Myanmar regarding the current situation of that refugee population in Bangladesh? And the request is beyond your answer now. If you could provide maybe tomorrow the Tribunal with the document with these recommendations in more detail, because it would be really useful for the Tribunal to have this kind of brief document with some specific recommendations in this situation.
Sure. I must must also put on record that once the government decided to sort of receive the refugees, at the highest possible state level, Prime Minister visited that place and, instructed that, everything must be done so that these people can, be safe. And, and that, we live in a polity where individual leaders matter. The Prime Minister has a lot of authority. So I guess if her instruction is followed duly, and the whole commitment of having a 2,000-acre land, to be developed, not in a remote island, in the mainland, if that is followed up, that's a very important first step. There is this criticism that, so many things could be done. But to be fair to the government, this is a huge influx. So it's, however best you may put in place, however best you might have preparations, you just cannot avoid many pitfalls. So and I think it's very important that Bangladesh government get its act together, the way it's getting, to have a proper, what you call, system in place where international aid is channeled, effectively, and quality relief management is ensured. I think any mismanagement would send out bad signals, not only to the international community, but to the local who have got swelling of goodwill for these people. And there are stories that things are not being properly done. So my bottom line is, have established a credible mechanism where we have quick but efficient, relief distribution ensured with participation of the migrants, the refugees will have to have a voice in that. I think bureaucratic decision making would not help, and also involving agencies which are mandated by international community and who have the experience. There are specialized agencies looking after healthcare, sanitation facilities and all that, not impede their involvement. I think that's something very important as much as possible. Also provide, the media access. So the narratives so that they can, constructively sort of criticize if there are problems, highlight local and international media, and highlight the problems that they endure. So these are, and most importantly, perhaps for Bangladesh, to term a spade a spade. It's about time that we give up our bilateralism, which government has given up. I think would come out of, internationalize the issue, speak to the ASEAN that, look, this kind, as I said, secondary flows may affect you bilaterally, ASEAN countries. And also, there is this Bali process in place. That's a mechanism where Bangladesh, Myanmar is a member. It is a process for, this kind of mass influx situations, how to deal with them. And there has to be appeal to the Bali process. Basically it needs to be triggered off. And last week I was in Manila, where Asian Dialogue on Forced Migration, where we had the co-chair of Bali process and others, and the committee felt that this is a perfect opportunity to really test the newly formed mechanism, because at the back of their mind, what they felt was in last year, in 2015, when all this irregular movement took place, the region was not prepared. So those are some of the concrete things internally that we can do, and also bilaterally with our partners to demand that they should do their bit.
Thank you very much. Helen?
Thank you for this extremely valuable, I think, input for us. And of course, the focus has been mostly on what has driven people to come across the border, what is the internal situation. But this gives a very important rounding
determination procedure.
Evaluation? No, not stateless, that's another issue.
Status determination.
Status determination. Is this the same thing that Aung San Suu Kyi spoke about, of verification in her speech this afternoon, which some of us heard at lunchtime. I don't know if you were able to hear the speech. But she spoke about a verification process and that they would accept people who had been verified as refugees.
No, I think I've not heard the speech, but I would think verification would entail whether they are citizens of whatever, whether they meet the criteria the Burmese state would be setting in. I guess.
I think this
Yeah.
is obviously we need a lot of discussion about what is in, but
the status determination procedure.
The status determination on the existing 21,000 residual, etc. What is the actual process?
The actual process, yeah.
How has it been?
Sure. I mean, there are very specific criteria on the Convention of Refugees, which said that if you have to cross the border, you have to be victim of persecution, the whole range of, and you have to be a member of a particular religious, ethnic, of political persuasion, then you qualify to be a refugee. So that is essentially on individual cases when people seek asylum, they do it. But this is not practicable in a situation like this. It's a massive influx, and if you'd like to do that, it's not possible. So under those circumstances, in the past, what happened was you let everyone in. Then you conduct some form of survey of the people who have come, and if there is a more or less a general pattern in the same stories, violence, conditions of insecurity and all that, then you deem that okay, since that has been the case, you accept en masse and give them refugee status, that these people qualify to be refugee. The ultimate, UNHCR helps the process, but I think it's ultimately on the government to sort of agree whether they would allow such a process or not. The point that I was trying to make here is since 1991, 92, these people have come either by families or boatloads or maybe a village. It was possible to look into and go for some form of status determination procedure to look into the veracity if they are genuine refugees or if they have a claim to refugee status or they are just economic migrants. If that was done, perhaps we could have alerted, or we could have ourselves put in mechanism, to sort of address the problem.
Thank you very much, Professor Abraham.
Thank you.
So we are just out of time because there is no more questions.
Can I just get 2 minutes on Helen's point about Aung San Suu Kyi's verification? I think that
I would suggest that because probably few of us saw the statement today, so maybe it would be wise if we could take the first 10 minutes of the session tomorrow, that probably everyone will be able to hear Aung San Suu Kyi's statements, to give this comment at the beginning of the session tomorrow. So we will finish for today the public audience. Thank you very much, Professor Abrar. We will do the break. The public session is finished for today. We will continue in camera. And as I told you in the morning, we will restart the proceedings tomorrow at 10 a.m. just for the possibility to continue being in camera for the first hour. 10 a.m. here in the courtroom. We will receive more public evidence, and we will have the closing statements for the prosecution and the presentation of the defense case tomorrow.
we sit there.
Esto de acá está bueno.